Paige Clapper, and I'm a Customer Success Architect with VMware. I'm going to go through with you today how VMware Cloud on AWS is set up and some of the prerequisites you're going to want to think about before deployment. So for our first prerequisite, you're going to need a My VMware profile. This profile will need to be completely filled out before you can even start your initial deployment. Secondly, you're going to need an AWS account. And this account will need to have admin privileges for some of the reasons that I'm going to explain to you later in the deployment. Third, you're going to need an activation link that's been sent to you. This link has been sent to you by email, and this email needs to correlate with your My VMware profile that you've filled out. So make sure that that email address has the My VMware profile attached to it before you begin your deployment. Okay, so now I'm going to go through what the VMware Cloud on AWS infrastructure looks like on a basic level, and then some of the ways that you can actually move your workloads into a VMware Cloud environment. Okay, so there are two parts to the internal VMware Cloud, and that first is going to be your storage. Let me grab a different color. This storage is vSAN. So down here, I have it drawn out. These are two disk groups, each with about 5.1 terabytes of storage, and then 1.7 terabytes of cache. So for the default configuration of this, it's going to be a RAID 1 configuration per node, I should mention. So what this would do is while you have 10 terabytes of usable storage, that will cut in about half after you use RAID 1. You do have the option to switch to a RAID 5 for a 4-node deployment. And this will cut that usable, or this will increase that usable storage for you. You also have different RAID configurations if you decide to change the node count, and if you're not sure based on your workload which RAID configuration you should use, you can go to vmsizer.vmware.com. And again, that will tell you, based on your workloads and a few questions, which RAID configuration you should choose for your specific workload or VMware Cloud environment. And then secondly, we have the networking. You have two gateways here. This is going to be, actually, let me increase this bubble. I'm going to write in there. This will be your management gateway and your compute gateway. The management gateway will hold things like your ESXi hosts, vCenter, and NSX Manager. Because this is a managed service from VMware, we will mostly be managing the management gateway for you, so you won't have a lot of rights in this area, but in terms of your compute gateway, you will be able to manage this yourself, and this will house all of your workloads. A few things about these two gateways. This is an NSX overlay network. So while you do have two public IP addresses up here, the default firewall on them is going to be deny. So this won't cause any sort of security issue day one, but will allow for future connection to your customer on-prem. So for your customer environment, you have your VPN gateway. And then this will be the internet in here. So how we recommend you connect your customer on-prem or your on-prem environment to VMware Cloud is going to be with an IPsec VPN. We do realize that it is time-consuming to establish an IPsec VPN internally, so we have a few different options that you can use. One of them being you can just use the public IP addresses on this as a temporary fix before you get your IPsec VPN set up. This will allow you to connect over to your VMware Cloud, and then the AWS connection will be happening over here into a specific VPC. So depending on which availability zone you decide to deploy in, this will give you the different amount of subnets. So for this one, there's going to be 3. And essentially what will happen is an ENI, sorry, that's a little hard to read. I'll just write it here, ENI. So an ENI will make the connection, and this is in the AWS environment per host. So there's a bunch of ENIs. This is just a pictorial, but this is how this connection will be made from your VMware Cloud over to AWS. So after you have all of the connections established, we should start looking into the different types of deployment that you'll want to be doing. So good thing I'm holding green. The first one is what we call greenfield. Greenfield is probably going to be the less likely of the options that you're going to choose, but this would just be if you just decide to deploy a new ISO or OVA template into your VMware Cloud. So essentially what that means is you spin up a completely new workload into your environment. The second option, which is the probably more likely for this, and I don't have a brown color, so I will just use yellow, is brownfield. Brownfield is going to be it's going to be 2 options in the brownfield. It's going to be L2 extension not a great speller, and I know I spelled that wrong, right? Yeah. And then L3 cutover. So with L2 extension, this would actually be if you just completely drag your networking environment over into your VMware Cloud, whereas L3 cutover would be if you replicate your networking environment, turn it off on your customer site, and then spin it back up on the VMware Cloud site. So this will be the same exact IP addresses that you used on your customer site. So both of these are options as a method to create connections in your VMware Cloud environment or to create a networking environment. And then the way that you would actually move these workloads over, we have a few options for you to do that as well. This would be number 1 is HCX. This comes with VMware Cloud on AWS when you purchase from us. So this would be the default option to move these workloads over depending on whether you chose L2 extension or L3 cutover. HCX is what you would use to move the workloads over. Number 2 would be site recovery. This is actually what we call our DR as a service or disaster recovery as a service, but it could also, in this case, be used for migration. And then number 3 is L2 or HLM. So L2 extension, again, as we mentioned before, is something that's included with NSX, and HLM is also included internal to the components in your environment. So these two would be more of a piece part option of where you can use both of these to migrate over. But again, HCX is going to come free and probably be the easiest method for you to have migration over into VMware Cloud. So that's it for the basic overview of the architecture. Next, I just want to go through some recommendations that we have before you start deploying, because we often see customers getting caught on a few items. So under this, I'll just put recommended. Number one is going to be IP planning. So IP planning is really important because if you have any overlapping IPs in any of these environments, it can cause a lot of issues. And worst case scenario, you have to wipe out your VMware Cloud and reinstall it. So for example, when you deploy, you need to give your management gateway an IP address. And if that happens to overlap with anything on your site or anything within the subnet of AWS, the only way to remove this IP is to completely destroy the current VMware Cloud environment and then reinstall it. So IP planning is really important. We highly recommend you have an internal meeting before you start this deployment to understand where and what IPs you're going to be using. And then number two, would be to thoroughly review your pre-flight checklist. So this will be emailed to you as soon as you have purchased VMware Cloud on AWS. And often we overlook some emails that have long content, but this will include your pre-flight checklist. So you'll want to review that, and it will give you helpful tips on how to put this together and even more recommended things to think about before you deploy. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.